Hello again, my true crime lovers. I want to thank you once again for choosing to tune into Cereal City Chronicles today, my little hometown, small town true crime podcast. Now, this is a podcast where we focus on the darker side of Battle Creek, Michigan, which is my hometown. We are better known as Cereal City, though, over here, so you might know us by that. I was born and raised here, as most of my listeners know, and I still live here. So I decided to start this podcast and to spread some awareness and to make sure that we never forget the victims that were lost to tragedies and violent crimes in our city. I think it's so important that we highlight solved and unsolved cases when we're advocating for justice and just to keep everyone informed. So I deep dive into some truly disturbing and pretty heartbreaking cases on this podcast. I am so very thankful for your support and your words of encouragement that I continue to receive almost on a daily basis at this point. Now, I want to touch a subject here. If you are a family member or you are a loved one of one of the victims that we discuss, I want you to know how sorry I am. I really try to take an empathetic approach here on my podcast, and I hope that you know that my heart truly goes out to all of you and everything that you have been through. I can't ever understand your pain, and my goal is never ever to add to that pain. So I will continue to respect your loved ones on this podcast and only share the information that I find publicly. Again, I want to reiterate that my goal here is never to upset anyone who has experienced such a terrible, terrible loss in their life. But I do think it's extremely important as well as necessary that we discuss these crimes. So now, I think it's about time that we time travel for some true crime. My listeners know I do like to remind you all what was kind of going on in the world at the time of the crime in which we're going to discuss today. So today we are actually time traveling to 2005. So strap in because we're about to jump back 21 years. And I know we have traveled back to 2005 before on the podcast. So I've decided that I'll share some different notable events of the year instead of repeating the same events that you've heard on a previous episode. So first off, let's get started with Angela Johnson. Now, this was a woman who was sentenced to death in Iowa for her crime. She would actually be the first woman in over 50 years to be sentenced to death, which I thought was crazy. Angela, along with her boyfriend, Dustin Honkin, are one of Iowa's most notorious murderers. They actually killed 5 people, and that included 2 children. Now, those murders took place in 1993, but as I said, she was sentenced to death in the year that we're discussing today, which is 2005. So next up, in Seattle, Washington, Mary Kay Letourneau, a convicted sex offender, marries her victim. And you heard that right. In 1996, Letourneau initiated a sexual relationship with her 12-year-old student. And in 1997, she would give birth to their first child. Then she would serve 6 months in jail before she was released, and then she was banned from seeing her victim, who now she had a child with. And then in 1998, she was discovered again with her victim, and this time it was in a parked car, so we can kind of understand there what was going on. So she was sent back to prison. And then later that year, she would give birth to the second child with her student. This is insane. I know. So Letourneau would serve 7.5 years in prison. And then 3 months after she was released from that stint in prison, she married her former student. Now, at the time that this crime took place, she was actually a married mother of 4. So, lastly, in 2005, the last Ford Thunderbird was produced. This was the iconic sports car, and it would actually cease production that year, and it really was a true tragedy in the eyes of some car fanatics out there. Okay, that's it. A couple dark events, one not so dark, and we are in 2005. So let's get into the crime that we came here to discuss today. I want to give a trigger warning that we are discussing 2 murders today, and one is unfortunately the death of a law enforcement officer. So if these details may be distressing to you, please feel free, as always, to skip this episode. But if you've chosen to stay, let's go. So as I said, we're going to mention 2 murders today, and it's actually 2 cases that we're going to discuss. And the first one is going to lead right into the next one. It's very devastating, and it never had to have this outcome like most of my stories. And I apologize in advance because we are absolutely going to have to jump around here a little bit in this episode. So please stick with me until the end because I promise it all comes back together. So first, let's chat about Unice Sharp. Unice was a 66-year-old man living in Battle Creek, Michigan. He was working as a cab driver for the company City Cab, which was the only cab company that we had in town, but today this cab company is no longer operating. But at that time, Unice had worked there for approximately 10 years, but I found that he had actually been driving cabs for over 30 years. And I really can't imagine the conversations that he had and the things that he heard and saw in so many years of driving people around. Now, Unice was originally from Arkansas, and he had moved over to the Battle Creek area around 1969. He would find himself here after he served in the U.S. Army, where he was actually stationed in Germany. So he then chose that he wanted to settle down in the one and only Cereal City, and here he would start a family. Unice was married, but sadly his wife Rebecca had just passed away a few years earlier in 2002. But on a lighter note, he had found love again, and he was engaged, and he was going to get married to a woman named Brenda at this time. So he was also a father. He had a daughter and a son who he loved dearly. I read that he was really a family man, and he enjoyed spending his time with them most of all. He also had quite a few other hobbies, which did include cooking and fishing and even inventing things. I found it funny that he also enjoyed eating out because honestly, even when we enjoy cooking, it's so nice to have someone else do the work for a change. And I see that Unice could definitely relate to that. Unice was also a lover of blues music, and I feel like I really have a good picture of him in my mind, just sitting down, working on one of his inventions and jamming along to the blues music that he loved so much. He really sounded like such a simple and genuine man who just enjoyed life as it came. Now, I wish I had more photos of him to share, but I was really only able to find one, which is just kind of shocking to me. He was described as a kind man, and he was a friend to everyone around him. I even found that as a driver, he had been robbed quite a few times, and he was always the one to just back down, give over his cash, just to protect himself. Nothing was worth his life, and to that I say, good for you, Unice, because absolutely nothing is worth your life. Now, this man really feared his job most days, which is so sad. It was good money, but it was a scary and unsafe job most of the time. And I can imagine that picking up strangers had to have had him on high alert at all times, high anxiety. But he didn't want any trouble. He really just wanted to get people from point A to point B and then move along with his day. Sadly, on April 26th of 2005, his kindness and his willingness to help others was completely taken for granted, and he would meet such a horrific end to his 66 years of life. On this day, Unice was working his normal shift, driving around and just taking people where they needed to go. It was said that Sharp then received a call for a fare, which was from a payphone, and this payphone was located at a party store that was around Territorial and Capitol Avenue. This would be around 11 o'clock at night. He would make this pickup, and then he would radio to City Cab to, let them know that he was heading over to Mary Street, which was just off of Main Street in town, for the drop-off. Now, I found that this radio system was a way for them to keep the drivers on their radar and help keep them accounted for during their shifts. But unfortunately, that radio call would be the last time that anyone ever heard from Sharp. Sharp's cab was reported missing sometime after 1 a.m. on Tuesday. The city officers were keeping their eyes peeled now for this missing cab, and they were looking all throughout the night and into the next morning. Then around 8 a.m., a call would come in that missing white cab was spotted near Riverside Elementary School. Now, if you're not a local, Riverside Elementary was about a 6 to 7 minute drive from the supposed last drop-off location that was supposed to be on Mary Street. However, it was never confirmed whether he made that drop-off or not. So the police would then respond. They would drive on out to the school, and there it was. They found the cab parked in the Circle Drive. This is near where the soccer fields were on the elementary property. And immediately upon finding the cab, the police knew that this was not going to have a good outcome. You see, they noticed blood on the trunk, and there was also blood near the car in the grassy area. Police then tried to open the trunk, but the vehicle was locked, so they weren't able to get into the trunk. So this is when they would then call the cab company, and they would request that somebody come out to Riverside Elementary and that they open the trunk for them. Now, this seemed a little odd to me. I mean, I am sure that they didn't want to damage the vehicle, obviously, but then again, they saw blood. They found blood on the trunk. So at this point, they had no idea what or who may even be inside that trunk. So this just to me seems like a lot of extra time taken, but I'd really like to know what you guys think about that. So drop a comment below and let me know what you think about that. But after a few minutes, the cab company owner would arrive, and he was able to, open the trunk for the police so they could figure out what was inside. And sadly, it was a sight that none of these officers would ever forget. Inside of the cab's trunk was 66-year-old Unice Sharp, and it was very clear that he was no longer alive. This poor man was found in the trunk of his own car. I mean, the absolute horror of that entire situation. So the police now knew this was a murder investigation. It was no longer just a missing cab and a missing driver. So the car would then be taken into the crime lab, as well as conducting an autopsy to determine what the cause of death was. And it was soon determined that Unice had unfortunately been stabbed to death. He died a horrible and a painful death. And my heart really goes out to his family who had to receive that awful news that day. So the police would then start investigating this murder, and they would begin by retracing the route that Unice took that night that he went missing. But as the days passed, they just weren't uncovering much, and they really didn't have any real suspects at the beginning. But less than 2 weeks later, they would finally have a lead. So this would come from the discovery of a bag of bloody clothes and a bloody knife, which also had a name and a phone number in the bag. And it was found that this evidence was in a trash can and that it was connected to the murder, and the police knew that. So the name was Chanel Postley. So with this information that they found, the two detectives handling the case would set out to interview this woman and figure out exactly what was going on here with this evidence. So on May 9th, 2005, Detective Lavern Brann and Detective Greg Huggett would head on over to Forest Hills Apartments, which is located at 140 Brewer Drive right here in Battle Creek, Michigan. And they were there to interview Chanel, the lady whose name and number was found inside the bloody bag of clothes. And they wanted to interview her mother, whom they believe may have some information on the murder of Unice Sharp. They weren't certain that they were suspects at all, but they thought that they would have some information. So the detectives pulled into the apartment complex, and this was just after 4 p.m. And they had the hopes of making progress in this investigation finally. But as you are about to find out, all that came out of this was absolute chaos and despair. Now, the information about what happened next has differed in almost every single article from the Battle Creek Enquirer, and that's our local newspaper. So I am going to share the information that was testified to by Detective Huggett. The detectives approached the building, and they knew exactly what apartment they were going to. They knew where she lived, and they knew which door they needed to knock on once they gained access to the building. So when they rang the bell at the front entrance to be let in, no one would answer. So then they would try another apartment number, and still they really couldn't get anybody to open that outside door for them to enter the complex. So at this time, Detective Huggett would decide that he was going to kind of circle around the back of the complex and see if he could find anybody. And he spotted a male who was actually on the porch of the apartment that they were trying to gain access to. So Huggett would inform this man, like, hey, we need to speak with you. And this man would say, you know, who are you? What do you want? He said he's a police officer. Okay, show me your badge. So Huggett would then show his badge, and the man would then retreat back inside the apartment. So at this time, it was believed that, okay, he went back inside. He's going to open the door and come out and speak with the detectives. But the next thing that Detective Huggett knew, shots were being fired. So as he runs back to the front of the complex to figure out exactly what was going on, it was discovered that Detective Lavern Brann, his partner, had been shot. So then the shooter is fleeing the scene at this same time, and on his way out, Detective Huggett is shot as well. Now, I read that the shot may have been a ricochet bullet, but it really doesn't change the fact that he already shot a police officer and now a second one's been shot. So now we have 2 detectives shot and a man with a shotgun that is now on the run. So who was this man? Who was he? Janelle Quincy Postley was his name, and he was actually the brother of the woman who the detectives were originally there to interview. So as you can imagine, 2 officers of the law being shot sent this situation into a nightmare quickly. Backup units were arriving, and they would rush to tend to the wounded officers. They were then transported over to the local hospital. At that time, it was Battle Creek Health Systems, and the rest of the department set out to search for the shooter, Postley. Now, Detective Huggett would be treated for a gunshot wound, but sadly, Detective Brann would end up succumbing to his injuries at the hospital. Postley didn't just injure an officer. He murdered one. So this entire investigation just got flipped completely upside down. So as the officers are searching for the shooter, they are receiving multiple calls for stolen vehicles in the area. First, a pickup truck was stolen, and then shortly after this, a black Thunderbird was stolen from a couple, and this was at gunpoint. So I'm sure you know exactly who this car thief was. Yep, it's Janelle Postley, the shooter that unfortunately took the life of one detective already. So the Thunderbird that he stole luckily did have a pretty recognizable license plate. It would read in all capital letters, "Fly in Fun," and that information was then immediately released to all police departments. I mean, everyone in this state was now on the lookout for this man who just murdered a police officer. His picture and the description of the stolen vehicle was being circulated everywhere. They knew what he looked like, they knew what he was driving, and it was time to find him. So then later that night, near Dearborn, Michigan, the car was finally spotted. They saw the license plate and they knew, we have to stop this car immediately. And that's exactly what this officer over in Dearborn did. He'd pull over the Thunderbird. He knew that this man was armed and dangerous. That was no secret. So he would end up calling for backup units to come help. But while waiting for the backup units to arrive, Postley would flee once again. So this officer would chase the car and they would end up back towards the Detroit area. And this is where Postley would crash the car. Just completely stupid and reckless behavior, if you ask me. But please hold tight because this isn't the end of the chase. Not even close. So Postley would then hop out of the Thunderbird that he just crashed and he would start running away on foot until he stumbled upon another vehicle that he thought he could steal. So he held this driver at gunpoint as well, and he took off in yet another stolen car. Now police would finally end up having to use their patrol cars to force this stolen car off of the road in order to detain this man. They would finally be successful, and at around 4 a.m., Postley would be apprehended by the Detroit police. And upon searching the car, they discovered a handgun, which was later determined to belong to Detective Lavern Brann. And I just thought that this was such a sad detail. I mean, a gun that was used to protect and serve was instead used in an awful crime spree. It's devastating. So I know that was a lot. I know. We are going to get back to Unice Sharp, I promise. But we need to recap a little bit here first. So Janelle Posley is now in custody, and his charges were lining up one after another. So he's now being held on 2 murder charges, armed robbery, and over 25 other charges. The murder charges, as we know, are for Unice Sharp and for Detective Lavern Brann. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here to the trial, and I'm also just going to summarize this, as I really want the focus of the episode to be more on the victims of this case. So it actually wouldn't be until the beginning of 2007 that Posley would stand trial for his crimes finally. And boy, did he have a lot of crimes he had to face. So let's start with Unice Sharp. I know it seems like we may have skipped over his death, but in order for you to understand this entire case, you had to know what happened during the investigation into his murder first. So Posley would be charged with Sharp's murder, and he would later be convicted after he stood trial for his other crimes. He would actually plead no contest in this case, and he would receive a life sentence for this crime. Not his only life sentence. Stay with me here. I found a quote from Sharp's fiancée stating that this had been such a long process and she really just wanted it to be over. It was also stated that she and many others felt that Unice Sharp's murder was overshadowed by the murder of Detective Brann. Brenda would even go on to claim that Sharp's life was just as important as Brann's, and she felt that he did not get near the public attention as the other case received, which I do have to agree with her on that in regards to the public attention aspect. But in the end, justice would be served, and Unice Sharp's killer was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes. It just took far too long and caused so much more damage in the process than necessary. Now, Janelle Posley would also be convicted of the murder of Lavern Brann, which would help ensure that he would absolutely spend the rest of his life behind bars. The jury only had to deliberate for a total of 1 hour and 45 minutes after all testimony was given in the Lavern Brann case. And when I looked up Posley's final convictions, he has 47 different charges listed on his arrest record, which I think is absolutely insane and terrifying to think about that. And I'm sure that everyone involved in this case sleeps better knowing that this man will never ever walk the streets as a free man again, as he shouldn't. On an important side note, there was another arrest that came from these horrific tragedies. A man by the name of Jack Sherman was arrested for providing a gun to a convicted felon. That's right. They tracked down exactly where Posley got this shotgun from, which ended up being a murder weapon. And Sherman would face up to 10 years in prison for his role in this case. And that's just a reminder that just because you don't pull the trigger doesn't mean that you won't be held accountable for your part in breaking the law. Okay, now we've heard both cases and we know the outcome. But before we wrap up this episode, I want and I need you to know exactly who Detective Lavern Brann was. I made sure to previously give you background on Unice Sharp, and I said everything that I could find about him. And I owe that same courtesy to this beloved detective. Now, the information on Detective Lavern Brann is much more extensive than Unice Sharp, but I'm going to share some pretty amazing things about this man that you all need to hear. Lavern Brann was born in Michigan in 1960. He would start his career working in the hospital, which was Battle Creek Health System at the time, and eventually he made his way into security at the hospital. And he realized after that position that he really had a calling for keeping people safe. So he decided to join the Battle Creek Police Department. This was in 1986. And around 1998, he was promoted to detective, which is the position he was in at the time. Lavern married Melanie, who was also an officer at the Battle Creek Police Department, and together they had two beautiful girls who they raised in just such a loving and a safe home. Lavern was a dedicated officer and a detective for nearly 20 years. He was described as a man who loved his family and who loved his community. He made a vow that he was going to protect and serve, and that is exactly what he did. I am now going to quote a pretty powerful summary of what Brann did in his life and in his career with the Battle Creek Police Department. Quote, Detective Lavern Brann had a distinguished career with the Battle Creek Police Department, working in narcotics, crisis negotiation, emergency response, and violent crime investigation. He served as a community service officer, a field training officer, and a bloodborne pathogen coordinator. And he was named the department's Officer of the Year in 2002. He also received numerous awards for his community involvement. And this involvement would include service on the Penfield School Board of Education, as well as participation in the Peer Listening Program, the American Red Cross, the Emergency Preparedness Expo, and the Substance Abuse Council. And he also was honored by the American Red Cross and the Advocates of St. Philip. Unquote. The city of Battle Creek has truly never forgotten the bravery and the service of this man. And in order to make certain that his name and his sacrifice are never forgotten, a portion of the business loop I-94 between the eastern and then the western city limits of Battle Creek has actually been named Detective Lavern S. Brann Memorial Highway. I drive past it every single day, and it really is right in the heart of the city that Lavern Brann loved so much. You know, over 2,000 people attended Brann's funeral, which I think just shows you exactly how much this man was loved and respected in this community. And there was also a change of policy that came out of this horrific murder of a police officer in our community. Lavern Brann and his partner were dressed in plain clothes on this day. And the department has since changed the policy to where detectives are given kind of pullover bulletproof vests, which they can wear over their suits and regular clothes, which is such a great change. You know, it's unfortunate that it wasn't policy then, but hindsight is always 20/20. And I think it's a really positive thing that came out of such a negative situation. As I said, the city of Battle Creek still mourns this loss, and I know his family lives with this grief every single day. I truly send my deepest condolences and all of my prayers for healing out to the families of Unice Sharp and Lavern Brann. The city of Battle Creek, my hometown, lost two great men within 2 weeks of one another, and their loss will be felt forever. It's so important that we recognize and remember the dangers that come with certain career choices, necessary career choices. It really is such a devastating reality that anyone has to fear being murdered while they're working. I want to thank all public servants for their bravery and reiterate that I have the utmost respect for law enforcement, all law enforcement. Well, the good ones, that is. And Lavern Brann was just that. He was one of the good ones. Now, I know that this was a long one, and I took you on quite a wild ride, honestly. We had to jump around quite a bit, and I just really didn't know any other way to cover these cases so that you could understand how one led right into the next. I want us all to remember Unice and Lavern for who they were and what they did, not what happened to them. And I also want Janelle Postley to rot behind bars, as that is the only place that that man belongs. You don't get to rip families apart. You don't get to take lives away in such a brutal way and then go on living your life. So justice was served, but it never takes the pain away. This was a tough one to cover, you guys. I mean, it's unbelievably heartbreaking, like most of my cases, and a lot of this information was found through extensive research. I really hope that I brought only the facts to you today, and you know that I try so hard to ensure that my research is thorough and that I bring you the information that you need to know. And you know that we have to do a palate cleanser after diving into such a tough case. And if you're new here, we do end every episode this way. I mean, I owe you the courtesy of resetting your mind after I've ripped it through such darkness. So today we are going to learn about a small business that's right here in Battle Creek, Michigan. This is always our palate cleanser on the episode. So Scott Sweets is who we're going to talk about today. And this has been a business that has been recommended to me many times now. And I've actually experienced these sweet treats myself, so I can speak from experience. Remember when the ice cream truck used to enter the neighborhood and the kids would come running and you're trying to get the money from your parents to buy a treat? Well, this is a new and improved ice cream truck. So Scott Sweets is so involved in our community. I mean, most events throughout the city, you're going to see this bright pink and blue truck parked and ready to serve up the best ice cream treats. You know, the old ones that bring you some nostalgia and new ones too. So you can even book the truck for your own event. So make sure that you go on over to the page on Facebook and give him a follow. And the next time that you're in Battle Creek, keep your eyes peeled for this fun ice cream truck. Well, that's all I have today for you true crime lovers out there. Please don't forget to follow along with me on Facebook and on TikTok. And that's where I'll be posting when my next episode is going to be dropping. And make sure that you subscribe and you follow the channel wherever you're listening so that you don't miss any uploads. I again have to thank you for your support of my small town podcast. I wouldn't still be here if it weren't for all of you. So let's help keep the memory of victims lost alive and continue to spread awareness of both solved and unsolved crimes in Battle Creek, Michigan, and beyond lately. It really does make a difference, you guys. I'll see you soon. As always, be safe and be kind.